Okay, hey everybody. I have the illustrious last speaking position, which everyone is hopeful for, when they're scheduled for a conference. So I'm going to try to make this interesting, not to say that, all these other presentations have been incredibly fascinating, at least to me. I know the other speakers and hopefully a lot of you guys as students. So I'm Matt Hallas. I work with Digital Globe. I'm a sales engineer, which sounds like a pretty cool title. What I get to do is basically be the technical liaison between our customers and clients and our sales folks. So I answer the technical questions of how best to integrate our products and services into the customer's kind of, infrastructure that they host themselves, or maybe it's something like ArcMap, maybe it's talking about what type of imagery should be in Bing Maps. So it's a really cool kind of varied job where I get to do a lot of different really interesting stuff. So satellites, open data, and the power of the crowd in the cloud. Pretty cool. Hopefully some of you guys recognize this shot. This was taken 2 weeks ago from our Worldview 3 satellite. This is of Texas Tech campus. So one of the great things about this company is that we have a lot of satellites. So historically, we've had 7. We still have 5 of those orbiting the Earth and actively taking pictures of the globe. So as you can see, kind of the bottom, arms, I guess, the line kind of shows we have all of these 6 satellites available currently in our image library, all the way up to Worldview 3. Worldview 4 is coming online in the next probably quarter or 2. We've been recalibrating it a few different times. And then, as you can see, Worldview 1, GeoEye 1, Worldview 2, 3, and 4 are all actively in orbit, imaging the Earth. So the highest resolution is going to be 50 centimeters, and then the lowest resolution, which is the lowest resolution you can find from pretty much any satellite company in the world, is 30 centimeter. So it allows us to collect about 4 million square kilometers every single day. This is, I don't know if you guys can see the orange kind of polygons that are up here. They're a little transparent. This is how many images we collect. One sec. Unplug myself. These are all the images that we're collecting in the past 3 days. Oh my gosh. Okay. This is after 2 weeks, and then this is after 3 months. So the benefit of having this number of satellites, of course, is the fact that we can cover basically the entire globe, usually within about a year, and that includes really rural parts, interior portions of the Amazon, which are historically really difficult to capture. There's what's known as a cloud belt that covers a lot of the globe. So getting high quality images in kind of Caribbean areas, in equatorial areas can be really tough. So when you have 5 satellites, you can basically try and try and try again, and eventually you're gonna get a cloud-free shot. So for those of you that do work in Belize, then oftentimes it's beneficial to have this number of satellites to kind of make sure you get the shot that you care about. We are the largest users of storage on Amazon Web Service. We have 100 petabytes of data in the cloud, which is a lot. And it basically allows you to have access to this historical archive dating back to 2000 and going all the way up to literally today. When we have an image that's processed and it meets our requirements of cloud cover, off nadir look, and a few other requirements, that immediately gets pushed to our archive. So we're constantly increasing this amount. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk today about our different exploits within the realm of humanitarian work, as well as kind of assisting governments throughout the world that may not have their own geospatial departments, providing them with imagery and with the resources for them to start building out maps of their home countries. So this is in Tanzania, where we actually did some work on trying to map out the different types of semi-permanent structures. These are called tukals versus more permanent structures, because that kind of flows into a lot of different work that allows people like the Red Cross, people like USAID to make more actionable choices, more intelligent choices regarding where to bring the aid and how much of that aid needs to be brought. So I guess I'll quickly mention too, I thought it was very funny that this is digital technologies for a better world. The Digital Globe mantra is seeing a better world. So it's really deeply rooted, I think, throughout the company that it's not just about making money. We are a commercial company, right? That's what every commercial company does, but a huge focus is truly trying to improve the life of people throughout the world, whether they be Americans or they be whoever. So I'm going to first talk about the Open Data Program. We've been doing things like the Open Data Program, where we've been supporting kind of different types of projects that would fall under what we now call the Open Data Program. We've been doing that for a long time, but it was really formalized in January of 2017. And what this is, it's basically a program that's focused on providing imagery for free, completely open use for anyone. You know, you don't even have to work for an academic institution. You could work for anybody. You could work for Facebook, you could work for Esri. If there's a major event that meets some of our criteria, which are pretty reasonable criteria, we're gonna pre-process that imagery and then make it freely available for anyone right on our website for them to download. So for those of you who just wanna see what digital globe imagery looks like, I would suggest trying to check out this webpage. It's really easy to use. It's literally just a hyperlink, and it starts downloading data, 30 centimeter, 40, 50 centimeter data. So the reason we did this is because, as you all know, especially with the onset of climate change, there's the amount and intensity of natural disasters has only been increasing, and we all are predicting that it's only going to continue to get worse. So unfortunately, that puts us in, or fortunately, it puts us in a position of great power where we can direct our resources and make these images available totally for free as soon as we collect them, so that folks on the ground can really start to help people. And then even after the fact, we can start to map out, okay, were there any pieces of information, any data points that maybe we missed leading up to this that could have helped to predict this oncoming disaster? Obviously, natural disasters kind of aside, but man-made disasters, you know, agricultural events where there's major issues getting the proper amount of food harvested for a region. It's pretty great. So our objectives with this program is mainly, first and foremost, to accelerate the disaster response efforts with timely, actionable information. And then number two, foster a community of practice around satellite imagery and geospatial intelligence for disaster management. So a criteria for this open data is basically some sudden onset natural disaster, be that a tsunami, a tropical storm, a cyclone, an earthquake. And we have what's called first look. First look is we have different levels of access for our imagery. A lot of people buy our imagery in a subscription model. They say, okay, I have this area of interest that I'm focused on. I'm really concerned about Tanzania and Zimbabwe. So I'm going to pay a small fee basically to be able to constantly see the newest images that are collected over these areas of interest. If you have the first look access, then there's going to be no holdback. So that image basically, once it's processed, without even meeting our technical requirements, it's going to be loaded into your instance of what we call MyDG. It's basically an online base map where you can look through all of the historical images we've collected over the area, and you can display them, use a time slider to see how things have changed over time. So the first look, it's interesting because it provides really, really accurate or really timely information, but sometimes it's not usable because in a hurricane, in a major precipitation event where there's flooding, what caused that? A lot of clouds. What's in between a satellite and the surface of the Earth? The atmosphere. So as a satellite company, we're constantly struggling with that issue of trying to get clear images. So this first look event throws that concept out the window and says, we're just collecting images because it very well could be in the northeast quadrant of the image, there's cloud free. And that's an area that can immediately be used, or that information can immediately be used by Red Cross, local municipalities. So even though 90% of the image may be garbage, basically, you can still use a little bit of it to help improve the quality of life. So I think this is a really great program. We will typically, due to the fact that we've had satellites in orbit since 2000, we have an image of every single location on Earth at some point from the last 15 years. Typically, you're gonna have that image collected by probably 2013, maybe 2014. So we have what we call pre-event images, and we have a massive archive of this. So when an impending disaster is on our radar, we will basically look and see what our archive image is, or what our archive has for that area, and then we will make sure we task our satellites to that new area so that when the event actually occurs, we're gonna be collecting images immediately. Oftentimes while the event is actually happening, and then of course for the few days or weeks after the event has kind of cleared out. One of the really cool things, we have a bunch of different layers that come with this open data program. We use what we've called Geospatial Big Data. That's our platform for cloud computing that's also hosted on Amazon Web Service. It allows you to basically throw powerful algorithms against this archive of data and extract really quickly actionable layers such as flood layers, settlement layers, hot maps, and radar. So that's enough text, right? We have a bunch of really cool images, so we're probably just gonna look at cool images here on out. This is right around, so this is when the cyclone Gita occurred in Tonga. I don't know how many of you heard about that. It was pretty recent. In fact, it happened, I believe, middle to end of January of this year. So this is a great example of the fact that there was no reason for us to collect this image over Tonga. You know, the people of Tonga didn't say, hey, we have a few $100s. We want to see where everybody's house is. We just collected it because we knew, unfortunately, down the road there would be a need to have this kind of archival information. So we have this picture from June 2016, which you can then juxtapose with a post-event image, which is what we see here. This is February 13, after the event occurred. And you can see the significant damage, mainly to vegetation, but also, of course, to a lot of homes throughout here. Another really interesting piece is this right here, is a blue tarp. So if you guys get into the realm of humanitarian work, you're gonna find that identifying blue tarps, quantifying the density of blue tarps is really important information because blue tarps are ubiquitous throughout disaster events. They are phenomenal at being a temporary structure, at stopping water, right, that's going to continue to come after a hurricane event or something like that. But from a remote sensing side of things, it's really cool because they have a very specific spectral signature. And I won't get into spectroscopy or anything, but you can use really basic algorithms to say, okay, here's my image, I'm gonna run the detect blue tent or blue tarp algorithm against that image, and it's gonna really accurately pull out all of the different blue tarps, which then of course you can start to say, okay, this is how many people we have. We have a cluster of blue tarps in this certain area, so we know that we need to bring a lot of aid, you know, be it water, medical supplies, or a lot of materials to start building up the new structure, right? That'll come down after the event has occurred. So I apologize for the dark image, but this is our platform called TomNod. So this is how we really start to leverage the power of the crowd. So TomNod is this really interesting tool. I would suggest all of you to log in. You can get access totally for free, and it's actually really similar to OpenStreetMap. Whereas OpenStreetMap, you're digitizing and basically tracing features on the ground that are then quote unquote vectorized to be put into this large database called OpenStreetMap. TomNod is instead asking people to identify if they see certain features or certain structures on the ground. So following a hurricane, we will open up a TomNod campaign where we will basically upload all of the post-event imagery to TomNod, and we ask people, okay, go in there and start clicking on trash heaps, start clicking on damaged buildings, all of this information, and it's a single click. So you're not digitizing kind of the entire trash heap. You're not digitizing the whole flooded road. What we're doing is we're having folks just select individual pixels. Those individual pixels can then be pushed up into a machine learning tool, which then, when you iterate on that several thousand times, you start to develop an algorithm. And you use the power of the crowd, where a bunch of people said, yep, that's a damaged building. Yep, that's a damaged building. Once you have enough confidence between a varied user base, then that is used as training data. So that training data then gets pushed into an algorithm, which then we can run, like I said, on that GBDX platform. So we can then say, okay, now show me all the flooded roads throughout the entire area. Show me all the damaged buildings. Really, really, really neat stuff. And what's almost cooler is that the guys who started this, they started this out of UC Santa Barbara, I believe. 4 guys, 4 college kids, and I can't remember who said it, I think it was John, like you get data science nerds, but then you also get geographers, and then you get maybe somebody who's like a biology nerd, and you get all these guys together and they have these really unique, cool ideas. TomNod was pretty much that. We had a guy that was focused on computer vision, another guy that really just wanted to be like a hardcore data scientist, and a few other folks, and they got together and they made this TomNod tool. And now those guys actually work for Digital Globe. So, you know, we have kind of this really innovative focus, I would say, with a lot of the departments at DG. So, how am I doing on time? So basically, another really great tool is being able to run these algorithms, right? You know, on the imagery in the cloud. You don't have to run a process on your laptop, on your desktop, that then takes up all the RAM on your computer. And you can't do a single other thing because your computer is totally, you know, basically hosed running those tools or those classifications that you ran from Envy, from Arc, from whatever it is. GBDX allows all that processing to be done in the cloud. And whatever, the cloud is kind of a ridiculous term in my opinion. It's totally fine, but it's basically you save your computer's processing power while leveraging massive supercompute capabilities. So you can extract flooded roads really, really quickly, and you can do it across an entire country. If you did that on your laptop or your desktop, that would take you 6 months probably. And you can do this sort of stuff in hours. So I come from a remote sensing background. I used Envy a lot in my early days, which is more focused on spectral science. And we've been really focused today on vector and kind of like digitization, which is, they go completely hand in hand. But this right here is when my parents ask, like, what do I do? And you know, my grandma and my aunt says, what do you do? I show them stuff like this. The fact that this was taken, this is the same exact image right here and here. But this second image was collected using the shortwave infrared bands. So right now, Digital Globe and Worldview 3 in particular is the only commercial satellite on the Earth that collects imagery in the shortwave infrared band range. And if you guys know about the electromagnetic spectrum, you have the visible range, which is of course what humans can see, the near infrared, which is where vegetation really starts to play in heavily. When you get beyond the near infrared range, you get into the shortwave infrared. Shortwave infrared is basically, I think it's like 1800 nanometers to like 35 or 4500 nanometers. Humans have absolutely no concept of seeing light refraction in that area. So we don't know that there's tons of stuff going on in the world that's working kind of in that wavelength range. This image allows you basically to see the benefit of SWIR data because this image, you basically peer through all of that smoke and haze because smoke and haze does not get obstructed by light, or sorry, by aerosols when it's sent back to the sensor or when it's being collected from the sensor itself. So you're able to basically look through all of the stuff that a drone wouldn't be able to see through, that a helicopter, you know, human eyes, you're totally obstructed. We run our hot maps on this, And it actually literally starts to vectorize exactly where the fire is occurring. And this is information that genuinely saves lives, because the only other way you collect this information is by having a firefighter on the ground saying that's where the fire is. You know, you don't have the ability to have a helicopter looking through the clouds, because it can't do that, because the smoke and haze is too intense. So being able to actually kind of look, pull back the curtain and say, hey, these are actually where the main hotspots are. We need to make sure that we get, you know, our fire line coming here. Whereas if you saw the previous image, you know, you can say, okay, that smoke looks a lot thicker, right? It looks a lot darker. You can't tell pretty much anything from this, right? So SWIR data is some super duper cool stuff. So we have several partners with this open data program. You guys have heard from Humanitarian OpenStreetMap. We also work with NetHope, with Mapbox. Team Rubicon is really, really cool as well. I'm going to get a little bit more into this with some more examples. So in our first year, you know, we basically had 11 open data events. We started with Cyclone Inawo. Went to a landslide, and then unfortunately, as you guys all know, the hurricane season was really, really intense last year, not only in the US, but US territories, and of course the rest of the Caribbean. So we basically provided free and open data for all of these events, and we actually allow that data to persist on our website for at least a year. So even if you guys as students kind of want to download imagery and see, hey, if I was in this situation, if I worked for an organization that needed to map where the flooded roads were, how can I do that? You can actually still go on, download this data, and kind of test it out yourself, do some experimentation. I think it's really powerful in that sense to really start to work with data and see how you would do it. So sweet metrics on usage, pretty awesome. So I would say this is where it starts to get pretty heart-wrenching, but also empowering when you work at a company like this. It's really tough to see how many people struggled, especially in Houston. I'm a Houston native myself. That's where I was born. I have a lot of family there. So that was really hard, but knowing that we were going to allow folks, first responders, to get initial access and continued access to data really kind of makes you feel good, because you realize that folks need help in as many ways as possible. So whatever can be done to try to just get the right information in the right people's hands, it's a success. So Team Rubicon, they are big partners with us in this capacity. So here we have now a few other images that show the horrific extent of damage. I believe this is Dominica specifically. And you guys can just see what I found really shocking, and I'm sure a few of you also heard about this, is the vegetation loss. So the structures, obviously, the loss of those were really tough, the loss of human life as well. But I mean, vegetation was hugely impacted on all of these islands, and it's gonna take a significant amount of time to basically build that back. And when you compare it to California with wildfires, what did we see in the aftermath of those wildfires? Saw a lot of mudslides, because when you have wildfires that occur in really highly alpine or steep areas, then you've basically, the wildfire has typically removed the root network that was holding back all of the soil. So then when you get a bunch of precipitation on top of that soil, it just slides right down the mountain, because there's no root network to hold it up. So identifying areas of really, really kind of steep and also burned regions helps to then direct folks like the U.S. Forest Service to say, hey, you need to drop hay in these areas, or another type of substrate that's going to form the basis of the new root network. So this will be close to all of you guys. These are shots from Texas, from the hurricane that impacted in August. So this is 30 centimeter resolution imagery, where you can see just, you know, the crazy amount of inundated homes. Of course, all of these roads that are connecting all of these homes are completely flooded. You know, you're not going to be able to get anywhere unless you're on a canoe. I'm going to quickly skip that. This is one of the craziest images or series of images I've seen since I've been at DG. So when the Fukushima disaster started to unravel, it all began with an earthquake, right? So we were all very aware in the international community of, okay, something potentially really bad could happen at this nuclear facility. The fact that DG has 5 satellites means that we were constantly imaging over those reactor sites. We didn't care if it was going to be the same image that was just collected a few days before, or probably just one day before, because we knew something was going to happen and we wanted to do our best to try to collect any type of imagery that we could. So what we actually saw, this is basically, what is this? Yeah, this is 1 minute before the explosion. And this is literally 3 minutes after the explosion of the reactor. So just like really kind of powerful imagery right there to show, this was passed off, of course, all throughout the Japanese government. The municipality that controls Fukushima, this was completely made freely available to anybody that really wanted it. So Digital Globe and our Global Development Organization, which is the group that I specifically support, we help out in all of these different capacities. So identifying the forest fire extent down to migration flows, refugee and IDP camp monitoring. You can use very high resolution data to actually track the movement of fleeing individuals from a conflict zone, which is sad, of course, but I think it's really useful information that then can be passed back to the UN High Commission on Refugees, as well as kind of the local organizations in the area. So we have, like I've talked about, this Geospatial Big Data platform, which is a fantastic resource to apply machine learning practices against a massive archive of data that's going to give you really important information that's going to help to eradicate things like polio. So in this specific area, actually, that we were working with, this was, I believe, for a project with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This community itself was unknown. They didn't know that there was this small population of people, living right on the coast. So simply by applying the building detection algorithm that we had created with imagery that we had over the area, we ran that and it extracted all of these polygons, which then indicate, that there's a semi-permanent, permanent, or temporary structure in the area. So this doesn't look nearly as cool now that we've heard Mr. Microsoft kind of blow that out of the water with 3 million buildings in 2 hours. But it's still, I think, really, really interesting. The fact that we're digitizing building footprints, and that's what we call information products, what you guys can just call vector layers. So building footprints are the next big kind of focus for our team for Digital Globe, to make building footprints over the entire United States. Then we're going to move to Europe, and then we're going to move to Asia. And we're hoping within a few year period, we're going to map out every single building structure in the world. Which is a pretty big task. And then people say, well, whatever, OSM is doing that. We had a great question that was like, well, what about the refresh? What about the ability to have this data be current? That's where satellites start to separate themselves from an open and crowdsourced community. Because OSM is a phenomenal tool, but unfortunately it's limited because the data is always going to be about 6 months old, if not older. So a satellite company, a drone company, an aerial imaging company, they have the ability to collect data immediately, right? And they can collect it kind of in perpetuity, at least if you're looking at a satellite company. So that's where Digital Globe helps to solidify, I would say, their use in this realm, is saying that, well, the OSM community built this awesome vector database, but then what happens in a month when that data is now old? What happens in 4 months when that data is old? And that's where using this type of really recent imagery can be really important. I'm going to flip through some really cool slides because there's even cooler ones at the back. So I don't have that much time. So I apologize. doing this sort of thing, automated flood analysis. You can actually see the path of a river changing. It used to be up here, and now it's kind of coming along this way. Once you combine that with other information like the building footprints, then you actually can start to map out what homes might be in danger of a flood event if there was to be more precipitation, or if the river just kind of more naturally floods. So, all right. This is an incredible story that was written by a woman working for the Associated Press, where she was able to identify how slave ships in Indonesia would basically fool the government and fool the world and use slave ships that were packed to the gills with guys and gals that have been basically indentured servants for anywhere from 20 to 30 years. And they were forced onto these ships. When they were on shore, they were kept in cages. But the way that they got around the government, these illegal fishing ships, is because they would basically, the two ships on the outside, these are the slave ships. The ship in the middle is the commercial ship that is registered with the country of Indonesia. It sells fish in international markets, which then makes its way to American tables. So this is a very real story where, the people constantly in the United States, in Europe, in Asia are consuming food that has been harvested by indentured servants. So the way that they do this is they have the slave ships rendezvous with the commercial ship outside of the technical boundary of Indonesia or whatever country it is. When they're out in international waters, there's no longer any monitoring that can be done by that country. Then they also turn off what's called an AIS sensor. An AIS sensor is something that is a beacon from a ship to a satellite that says, this is where I am. This is my ship locator ID. This is kind of the track that I'm going on. And it's mainly for safety reasons because you want to be able to know where ships are when there's weather events. But what these guys do, these shady, shady people, is they turn off that AIS sensor well before that so that there's no ability for companies that track AIS information to say, oh, well, we know that the ship's going to be in this area because they had their AIS sensor on for the last 200 kilometers. They turn it off. We're basically blind. This woman at the AP did phenomenal work on the ground, talking with a lot of former indentured servants who have escaped, talking to individuals who just kind of probably knew the captains or at least kind of knew the situation. They were able to say, okay, this is probably where the ships are rendezvousing. So we then tasked our satellites very regularly over this area. And we said, doesn't matter if there's clouds, whatever. We're capturing images over this kind of defined AOI in hopes that we capture this picture. And this picture right here is what led to the release of several hundred slaves, as well as a lot more, I would say, international and definitely regional understanding that this is a major problem, that this is something that we need to solve, we need to get better at, and we need to not allow. So we have this really sad but powerful video that all DG employees are basically shown on their first day. And it, I think, drives home this concept of seeing a better world, of the fact that we're doing this for people that aren't just us. We're not trying to just take home a paycheck. Some of the guys that were interviewed after the fact, they said, I didn't know that there were satellites in the sky looking for us. Like, it's a really insane concept that a company that's been around for 20 years that typically just sells to the government realizes, oh, there's a whole lot more that we can do to help improve quality of life throughout the world. So then, shameless plug, as my time is coming to an end. Digital Globe for the longest time, for 17 years, was its own company. We're now actually Maxar. Maxar has 4 separate companies underneath that. Digital Globe is one of them. MDA is another. So MDA was actually really essential in capturing those the images of the ships, because MDA, their main claim to fame is they own RadarSat-2, which is a radar satellite. Unfortunately, I probably don't have really time to get into that, but radar satellite does a lot of really interesting stuff, like identifying sovereignty protection. You can use that AIS data to make sure that fishing vessels are fishing in the waters they're supposed to, that they're not fishing in either restricted areas or in another nation's waterways. And then Radiant Solutions is the third company under this Maxar umbrella. They are basically a bunch of really grade A spectral analysts that produce maps such as this. So they're actually showing the various conflict zones throughout the Middle East. They also map out what we call human landscape maps, which for military purposes as well as humanitarian purposes, it's really essential to know what is the language that's spoken on the ground, kind of what's the percentage of that language, what is the religion, what is the kind of general age. All these pieces of information are really important about kind of mapping not just where you are, but who is in the area and how best can you interact with that community. And then finally, Space Systems Loral. This is like, we had this video where basically, I'll just quickly explain it. They're working on technology that's going to allow them to refuel satellites in orbit, which is going to completely change the satellite game, because that's what is the biggest, that's why satellites eventually have to deorbit. They're out of fuel. It's not that their data storage is full. They can download their data all they want, upload more. Their systems are typically going to last 40, 50, 60, 70 years. It's the simple fact that there's no more fuel to change direction, to move up and down in orbit. So Space Systems Loral, they typically create satellites. They build them up. They do telecommunications, imaging satellites, but they also are now working on kind of satellite repair as well as satellite refueling in orbit. Which is like total science fiction ridiculousness. So yeah, cool. Thanks for having me. No, that's an awesome question. I don't totally know, but from what I understand, radioactivity is typically outside of the near infrared range in the wavelength. I believe it's more in the shortwave infrared and beyond. So it wouldn't have been captured by just the 700 to 1500 nanometer range, which is the near infrared. Yeah. Yeah, no problem.
Right. Thank you, Matt. That was a great presentation. Do you guys have build composites and offer composites to the users, like best pixels from the last 3 months, or?
Sorry, say it again. Do we all?
A composite.
Composite. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my
Yeah.
Spanish. Doing a great job. So, do you guys provide some of those for every 3 months or every 6 months, just like a Modi's 16-day composition?
So do you mean like big mosaics, kind of like a bunch of images stitched together?
For big regions, I'm thinking is something, I don't know if you've seen that time-lapse, Google Earth Engine time-lapse service, where you can see all the images from the 1980s to 2000s. Because I see, something like that will be a great tool to have for land science, for example.
Yep.
And so I was wondering if you guys have thought about doing something like that with your data and providing that to the users.
Yeah, so that's absolutely part of our business. It's we have, when you sign up for a subscription to this MyDG or Digital Globe Base Map, as we call it, that's going to provide you all of the historical images that we have. So it's not like we're, I guess, providing on our website to say, this is Manhattan and here are the last 10 images that we've captured of Manhattan in the last quarter. But all those images would be available through the subscription service if you were to, buy into that specific area of interest. Does that answer your question or no?
No, I guess.
You want like a temporal stack, right?
Yes.
So that comes with this subscription. If you were to buy an individual image, that would just be the one image, all the pixels from that area, that's all you get. But if you were to do this subscription model, then that gives you all the historical images that we have of that area. Yeah. Is that?
Do you have any plans to make the building footprint data available to the public?
Not right now. No. Sorry.
Just a quick question. What's your resolution on the infrared bands in the different, you've got different, near, short so far?
Yep. So near infrared's 1.2 meter, and then shortwave infrared is going to be 7.5. And the 7.5 meter, unfortunately, we have to upsample that. The federal government has restricted SWIR data, and they've said that it cannot be smaller than 7.5 meter pixels. We collect it at 3.7 meter, but we have to actually sample it up to 7.5 because of the gov. Yeah, and we actually, that's an interesting point. There's a lot of history with Digital Globe and kind of pushing forward or pushing the limits of the federal government and how they restrict satellites. So our CTO was given the first ever license for a commercial satellite. And then recently, the last 3 years ago actually, 6 years ago, he was the main instrument in driving the federal government to reduce the allowed pixel size. You used to only be able to collect imagery at 50 centimeter. He was actually able to get it reduced from 50 centimeters to 25 centimeters, but we collected 30. So
So then does this only apply for within the United States? What if you're looking at a different country?
No, it's globally. So what's interesting is Israel has a bunch of really big contracts with us for imagery. They get all of their data at 3.7 meter, their SWIR data. The federal government gets all of the imagery, all the SWIR data at 3.7. So if you have some sneaky way of associating yourself with, a government entity, then there's a good chance actually that you might be able to get the 3.7. And we're really focused on getting that restriction lifted because 7.5 meters is, you can use that for mineralogy pretty much, not many other applications.
Hello, I have a question here. So I'm wondering if the Digital Global will provide some open access, geospatial platform like a Google Earth engine, so we can do some, do some research at the global scale.
So we don't have any totally open access, but this Geospatial Big Data platform that I talked about, GBDX, we have really very low level entry costs for academics. So that's basically our platform that you can process in the cloud, that you can run a variety of algorithms against our archive of imagery. So if you're interested in working on a platform that's not kind of a localized system, and you want to see if you have a good idea about trying to develop some new type of classification, some new land cover classification, I would suggest you can reach out to me, and GBDX is probably going to be the best way for you to do that.
But we need to buy the access.
Sorry?
Do you pay for that?
I have to check with about academic institutions. I believe you still do, but it's extremely cheap. Like for the amount of data that you get, I think you can do monthly subscriptions where it's around $1,200. Yeah, and that gives you it gives you access to any image around the globe, but you're limited by how much data you can use within the month, if that makes sense. So it's not saying like, here's the whole archive, but it's saying here's the whole archive and you have this much gigabytes worth of usage of data total. It could be in South Africa, it could be in DC, it could be in Canada, wherever, but you basically only have a limited number of gigabytes per month that you can utilize.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. And feel free to ask me afterwards too, if you got more questions.
One last question in here.
So you mentioned that, for example, that you have contracts
versus Israel, and they ask for specific data. So I'm assuming you're photographing stuff that they ask for any other country. Is it possible to, if we're looking for some specific event that happened anywhere in the world, is it possible to first ask if you actually have, if you've captured that event? Because I'm assuming
Absolutely.
you're not taking photos of everything, right? Your satellites are targeted to specific zones, and if it's flying over something, you're just photographing because that's a cheap part of the.
Absolutely. You can definitely just ask, and we run what's called a feasibility all the time. We either do an archive search, or if we don't have that specific image, then we can task a new collection over that site. But it's not like a cost to you if you just want to reach out and say, hey, do you have images over this area at this time? It's part of what we do.
Very good. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thanks, guys.